Here's a toast to the Petticoaters. May they thrive and grow and create many more paintings for us to show. Happy 60th birthday.
60th.
60th birthday. Here's to many years of fun and play. Yay!
But what happened in the 50s as well is you had this combination of GIs coming to Ringling to learn and develop their skills as artists. And then you also had people who either graduated from here or those who were just attracted to Sarasota alone, who were avant-garde painters, came to Sarasota. And at that time, of course, it was a small fishing village. But again, it had this healing kind of power to it. But it became a real colony, a real mecca for visual artists to come to, probably, quite frankly, because of the light. I mean, the light is so bright and so vivid here, and it almost lets you see things even more clearly.
We have been here in Sarasota for 13 years now, and it's Mecca for artists. Ringling School of Art and Design is doing a great job and attracting more and more students, and it has a wonderful history.
Well, one of the things I'm really proud about, okay, as we're talking about Petticoat Painters, is the fact that Ringling College was actually a catalyst for all this to happen, okay? But for Ringling College, it never would have occurred. And so I'm very proud of the fact that it was very, very early on an instigator to really be able to showcase and help women artists become successful. Marty Hartman has been a jewel here in Sarasota. One of the most influential women in Sarasota in the visual arts, Marty Hartman, who was sort of the de facto head of our alumni association, if you will. But she had a show in the early 50s, 53, I think, and it was a show only women artists. And then the next year, it was another show of the same sort of thing, of just that same gender. And so out of that grew the Petticoat Painters. She and her husband met at Ringling, fell in love, and as their son would tell you, may have actually Bill, the son, believes he was probably conceived here on campus. Okay. So, which is probably true.
Bill registered when I was on deck. I thought he was the best looking thing I'd ever seen. But he also, when we went to class, he would walk in the portrait class, he would set up his easel, set up his thing, paint, walk out. Nobody said anything because he was better than anybody in there.
So in any event, they, she was a student here, of course, and that was rare to have a number of females actually in the art school, especially when you had all the GIs that were around. But all these people who were young, vibrant, 20, 25-year-old kids became really kids who loved art and loved visual art. And so they all hung out together, and then after Marty and Bill graduated, they really didn't want to go back to Michigan.
And we just loved the whole idea of being an artist down here in this beautiful place. Right. Nobody ever wanted to leave, so a group of us who loved Sarasota, like all these other guys and gals, and we just dug our heels in and had a way of making a living and stayed.
The reason why people move to Sarasota is because of the cultural scene. That's what differentiates us from other beach communities, is the fact we have this amazing cultural community.
Clearly, one of the things that Sarasota was a visual art town. In some respects, that was because of what the museum did years ago, the Ringling Museum, and in some respects it was because of the colonization of the community through the residency of people like Sid Solomon.
This is something else I've observed over the years, is that there are artists in particular that for whom to own one of their paintings and have it hanging in your living room over your sofa, let's say, is like, it pronounces that you're now a Sarasotan. Sid Solomon achieved that years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Greg Rubidoux, Bob Larson, just to name a few.
And none of the Petticoat Painters.
Well, that's, first of all, they're all women, and that's a tough status for a woman artist to achieve, especially in a town like Sarasota, which is quite conservative.
Well, it was predominantly women.
Was it really?
Oh yes, but it was the boys' world, boys' show. So that's how I became a petticoat painter in a sense.
So there were more women than men, but the men were the ones showing. Is that what you're saying?
It was the boys' world.
In the early 50s, it would have been really difficult. If you look on the national scene, the only woman I know of who made it at that time was Helen Frankenthaler. She did very, very well. But other artists, Elaine de Kooning, wasn't well known until the 80s.
Given the fact that it was so difficult in the 1950s and 60s for women to be represented and to have shows and to win shows, that they were second-class citizens within the art world. I don't think it exists quite like that anymore.
Painting was different in those days. A lot of very wealthy women with breeding, they would travel around the country attending classes with well-known artists. Mm-hmm. They had the money, they could do it.
They were all women artists, and I don't know, I grew up in an age where whenever I had a lot of men in my studios, they would start telling us what to do and how to do it.
Lee Krasner, an interesting case. She had a small studio in their house in the Hamptons, and Jackson Pollock had a big, big studio. She painted small paintings, or even in large paintings, she painted small gestures, and he painted large gestures. And again, work just not acknowledged until much, much later. So in Sarasota, Florida, it would be even more difficult for female artists to be known.
Two of our painters were abstract painters, mm-hmm. and the one lived in New York, and they could not enter the abstract show because there were women For women to have a show was something.
Was a big deal.
Was a big deal.
Right.
Artists who became as famous as Louise Bourgeois never had a show at the Museum of Modern Art until she was in her 80s. So Agnes Martin, another artist, not really acknowledged until she was in her 80s. So that's been the plight of female artists.
Oh, that little Marty Hartman. She's never won a prize here before, and she's beat out Sid and all those landscape painters, and she got first prize. Well, we don't have to give her any money. We'll just make this piece of paper saying she has first prize.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, it's right. So I am so dazzled at winning the prize at first, you know, and then when they have this little giving the prize money away, my husband kept winning these prizes, and he got money. If it was 15, 10, and 5, it was more likely 25 and 15 and 10, you know, something like that. But one prize money would buy a week's worth of groceries.
Sure.
And they hand me this piece of paper saying I had won first prize. They don't think I'm a painter. And even if they don't, I'm due my $15 or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
This ain't right. Then I began looking around and watching the shows and who won the prizes. It's a boys' world. It's a boys' world. So I invited the 7 women over and introduced them to each other and gave them some coffee and a cookie. You know, I'm a Southerner, never leave hungry. And so I asked them if they would like to have a show, and just was busy, you know, looking at each other. A show? So I said, well, we're going to have a series. You know, this is going to be a gallery and a percentage. But at that time, I did the publicity, I did the refreshments, I did everything.
Now, did they know each other, any of the women?
Very few.
So
if they belonged to the Art Association, a lot of them didn't.
So these were like total strangers who all
but
got
I
together.
Saw their work. We had the Petticoat Painters. We put on 7 to 8 shows every winter.
Who came up with the name?
Oh, yes. I hate the name. Well, they tossed some names around, and Shirley Clement, who was one of our most talented, she was our diva, she and Helen. And she came up with Petticoat Painters. We laughed. It was a joke.
Right.
You know, we didn't even think about having a second show, you know. But it was so blooming successful. Every woman who belonged to the Art Association came to see it.
Well, everyone hates the name. Everyone hates the name Petticoat Painters because it just is so demeaning, I guess. But I think they did that originally just as a sort of in-your-face thing. And so I don't think we need to be in your face anymore, but the tradition behind it still needs to be maintained.
And I've also been involved in the dialogue and conversation, should it stay or should it not? And that's a hard one because the language is not the language that is used today.
And one of the things that has a mixed reaction is the name Petticoat Painters. People tend to think, oh, cutesy, you know. We are not a cutesy group of women painters.
I think the Petticoat Painters is appropriate as far as a name goes for their organization. It says that it's women supporting one another.
In terms of changing their name, in the future, it may be that most people don't know what a petticoat is, so they might have to think about that. But otherwise, it's a very charming name.
I guess at the time, it was appropriate. I think it's still kind of cool. It's kind of neat, you know, a little different, and I don't know. I don't think it's detrimental.
And of course we are burdened with that name, which none of us like, but it's what makes us a historic group, so we have to keep it.
That is strictly women, and that is really a very small group, and that is an invitational only. I know of groups of women painters that, you know, are open to membership where almost anybody can join, but that's not the Petticoat Painters. So I think the Petticoat Painters is unique in the fact they're very careful of who they invite in the group and very selective about where they show and what they show. I think very conscientious group of women.
I remember being so nervous the first time I exhibited with them because I think I spent 2 or 3 days looking at all my paintings thinking I had to put in something in the show that was worthy of the Petticoat Painters. Like, well, yeah, she worked at Hallmark, but, you know, that didn't mean anything. But now she's a petticoat painter, you know. It's like I was suddenly on the map.
I really give them a lot of credit for forming a group that's just women. You know, I think it's very valid even now. I'm sure when it first started it was valid because women artists didn't get paid attention to. But let's be honest, there is still that breakdown there. I mean, and if people don't think there is, they're living under a rock. Because, I mean, hey, it's all over the news right now. You know, gender discrimination, racism, you know. And as a woman, yeah, it's right now in this country, and I don't know how it is other places, but it's just human nature. It's what people are, and still that's getting better and better and better. So let's say it's someday, some wonderful day, everybody is looked at equally. Still, what a great thing to have, you know, to be able to talk to these other women about your work and you know, like if you get rejections, to be able to commiserate with somebody that understands what the heck you're talking about.
Because our students don't have the personal history of the struggle to and don't really see it as existing now in terms of being able to have equality in exhibitions and other aspects of the art profession. They feel often that special groups are not necessary.
Sometimes people ask me, why are you still teaching women artists? And I say, because they're left out. Women artists, and not only women artists, minorities too, are left out of most art history textbooks. They're just not considered important. They're not the big names that make the big money. Still, if you look at auction records, you see that women's art, even the very top female artists, sell for much less than the top male artist. And it's much better than it was 20 years ago, but it's discouraging still.
There were more women in the art classes than there were men, but the only important people were the men. Those were the people whom they expected to succeed or to find their way in the art world. And to a great extent they were right. Because most women went on to have children, and it wasn't like it is today. I expected to be a mother. I expected to be a stay-at-home mother. I loved doing it.
From being, I don't know, maybe it's from being female and not having a huge ego and thinking I am the greatest, and then showing other people what you do and this is how it's done. I think little girls are brought up to stand in the back row and not express themselves loudly.
When women are together, they're loose, they're open, they're not concerned about what might offend a male, and we all love men. But when men come into the picture and at meetings, they tend to want to be in charge, and the dynamic is very different.
You would think by the 50s things were starting to change, but they weren't. It took the feminist movement in the 70s. Started, I always tell my students, started with Linda Nochlin writing an article for Art News, 1971, why have there been no great women artists? And her idea was similar to the Virginia Woolf idea from 1929, that women don't have place, a space, and they don't have income, and they're not acknowledged.
A man who is an artist will put his complete focus on his art, will have a career in that field. Usually has a wife that will do all the other little things for him that he doesn't have time for. A woman who is an artist usually is multitasking. She's got a family, in most cases, children, possibly a job, and is still a painter. So she's used to doing 5 different things at once. How much time and attention can she put into her work to promote it, to publicize it? Whereas a man puts 100% of himself in his work, in his art. And sometimes I used to be a little jealous of that.
When I was younger, I have to say, I did think the men had it made, because it seemed like the women did the work and the men were painting, and they didn't stop like women stop. But I think it's just because of our nature of being mothers.
I think when my children were young, yes, I did not work that much. Yes, definitely. I mean, I think I had periods of time where I did not work when they were little, and we moved around, and it wasn't a question of always time, it was a question of a place to work.
You know, a lot of artists who are women have to divert themselves from the traditional roles of being a wife and a mother and a homemaker and all of that if they want to really pursue what they believe in. And I can understand Alice Neal's dilemma at the time in which she was attempting to follow her art. And I've read about her, and I've seen documentaries about her and her children, talk about what a terrible artist, mother she was and all of that. But it's hard. I used to paint in the bathroom at 2 o'clock in the morning when I was a young mother, because that was the only time I had in the course of the day to do my work. I used to paint on the kitchen table when I had an infant, but I always did my work. And I've always been a good mother, I must add that.
The problem comes in when you're raising children. I know in my case, there was a pivotal moment when I had to decide. I was doing some printmaking, and I thought I'd had 3 free hours. So I had lines in my living room going up to hang my first color of print, and then I was going to do the second, third. I had 4 color wood blocks that I was going to print. And around the second color, I get a phone call. My husband was ill at work and he was coming home, and I had to pick him up within a half hour. And at that moment I had to make a split decision. Did I go with the block printing or the husband? It was true. It was my first husband. I decided, well, I had a very young daughter. I'd better just get to the train station, and pick him up. And I took those 4 blocks, and I hid them someplace, and then I got rid of them. I never tried to work at home again when I could be interrupted. It's just very difficult when you're in the middle of a process that really cannot wait. Mm-hmm. Printmaking can't wait. You're keying in the different colors, and you cannot just forget it in the middle. Right. But I had to make that decision because I had a young child, and I needed to be supported. That's just plain the way it is. But I've often thought about that pivotal moment. Did I make the right choice, you know? Anyway,
Well,
sometimes
said,
we do have that juggling act, that multitask juggling kind of thing going on. That's why I love this part of my life. I just can focus on just what I want. Children have grown. This is my time.
I used to paint every day, and now I've let family life get involved more than I used to with my grandson and everything, so that's happening. But he's painting, and he paints with me, and he draws and things like that. So I'm still doing that.
We have another artist in the family now, which is my granddaughter. Her name is Katya Young, and she is a very good artist, has sold paintings, she has finished 1 year of school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, which is a very great art school.
I just always was painting. Before I started back to work again, I would take off and with the old bucket and my watercolors in my lap and go out and sit on the country roads and paint old barns and things like that. And that, you know, after you raise your children, you need to get back into your passion, and that's what I did. It got me going again, and the kids loved it, and they probably were drawing before they were sitting.
After finishing at Kent, I did manage to get some teaching at Youngstown State. I got some teaching at Akron University, where they hired me to teach drawing. I taught drawing there. Actually, I applied for a full-time position there, and later found out why I didn't get it. They accidentally, I think maybe somebody in the office maybe did it on purpose, sent me the interview notes from the fellow who interviewed me, and he had, you know, very strong sculptural qualities, all very positive. And at the end, in letters about that big across the paper, was 3 small children.
When I used to paint in a very figurative way, I was expressing what women feel, and on a very psychological level. And at a show in Baltimore, a man came up to me and said, "Your work is very feminine." And he didn't say it in a particularly complimentary way.
In my graduate years and with the guys, there was talk of women use these colors, men use those colors. Women put them here, men put them there, which was always fascinating to me. But then all they'd have to say is that's what men do, and I'd do the men thing and put the color there or use that color there. Anyway, now I don't really pay attention to that anymore.
When I look at a piece of art, first of all, I don't think about the person who painted it. I want to think about the art.
I chose to sign my work with my initials so that I wouldn't be recognized as a woman, that I wouldn't be treated any differently.
Faith Ringgold, I really identified with her as an African American artist. I loved her work. I studied her work. I also loved Alice Neal. I loved her work. I felt it was so strong, and she just made these portraits just to show you the real image of this person, the inner person. I loved Frida Kahlo, another one that I found to be someone that I identified with, even though her images were very tragic and very, maybe upsetting, but she was expressing herself. So I would say I would identify with her. I've never identified with any male artists.
I would certainly never describe myself as a female artist. I mean, it's artists.
And is it ever prefaced with men artists?
No.
Never,
No.
ever. But women, yes.
Yeah, you're either an artist or you're not.
Yeah.
Well, back when they started, I think it was important for women to encourage one another, and especially by the fact that they are creating careers out of their art. And that is something, sorry to say it, but more typically men do that. And so by bonding together and supporting one another, they have been very successful. And so networking is the key.
So you feel like it's still a legitimate organization to be in existence?
Absolutely. Important. And it's as important today as when it was founded.
We have a shared history. We've all gone to art school. We've all struggled.
I've been an artist since I was a child, and I just make things.
I became interested in art in the first grade. The teacher put my painting up for parents' night. And I said, ooh, I think maybe I'll be an artist.
And I think it's kind of interesting that I did not grow up being an artist. I didn't paint or draw when I was a kid. I never took it in school or anything that I remember.
I always painted. I've always been an artist all my life.
And my dad used to keep bringing me from when I was about 6. He'd come home from work and he'd have a bag with some kind of art supply. And they just kept feeding me art supplies, the same thing. And that was actually a career that was chosen for me. And I worked into it, and they were a lot smarter than I was.
I don't have any formal education in art, so to speak. I did attend the University of Delaware for 2 years right after high school for art, but then I ran away and joined the circus.
But I grew up with an artist mother and artist relatives, so art is something that I am. It's not, I didn't become one. And she was a great influence on me.
I had a teacher that was a ballerina, besides being a teacher, and I was always drawing and painting, and she told my mother to get me some private art lessons. And I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and I don't think they had kids' private art lessons back in 1952.
And I too got my mom sent me to some art classes when I was very,
With adults?
very young. It was part of it helped me get through high school, all my art classes in high school. You know, because I didn't do so well in one class, but A's in art.
Yeah.
So it all balances out, right?
Well, I was in cahoots with all the teachers because I did the bulletin boards.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. If I would get a sore throat, my mother and my bedroom was right by the driveway in St. Louis, and I hear my mom get in her little car and she'd go down to Jensen's Market and get a new coloring book, new construction paper, new crayons, and come home. And as soon as I, was done with fever, but I still needed to be home, I'd go downstairs in front of the radio and listen to the second Mrs. Burton, and I'd pull the blanket over the chair that I was under, and I colored and dreamt about it. And
What smells better than brand new crayons?
Nothing. Nothing. New paper.
Every September you want to go and smell all the art supplies for the kids.
Absolutely.
Art teacher said, you use colors well. You could be an artist. That's all they had to say. I went home and said, my teacher says I could be an artist. I was at the Brooklyn Museum Art School the next Saturday or something. I haven't stopped since.
And and I got to paint. That was my favorite part of school, and I never thought about it. It just was there from the beginning. It wasn't a decision.
My parents had a friend who owned an art supply store, and whenever he and his wife would come to our home, he would bring me some art supply, and he'd say, for the budding artist. And I think part of that even goes back to my loving to use all these different mediums, that I never knew what he was going to bring and, how I was going to use it. So, I guess some part of you does know at an early age.
One thing you do, you paint. Right. Your whole being, it's got to be centered on your work, painted year round. If you're a painter, you paint. You don't diddle your time off here and there.
Becoming a good artist, it's just like everything else. You got to practice. Yeah, you have to do it every day. You want to be good at something, you have to do it every day. And granted, you have to have something. You have to have some kind of talent. But even my husband looks at my work sometimes, because in the house upstairs there's older work, and he goes, I remember when you did that, I thought it was so awesome. And he goes, and now I look at it and think, oh, that's all right. He said, in comparison to what you're doing now. And he said, you just grow and grow, and you just become better, and I can see it.
So as an artist, if you're evolving, it's not, you get out of that box. And I don't think artists are, I see artists who do things and they're successful. And they keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. And I couldn't do that.
They say that most artists will have to work on 6 different things before they'll get one successful painting. When I read that, I felt very relieved, because I'm not the only one that has to struggle. It's like I fight my way through every painting. There is no template. I don't have a formula. I don't want a formula. I want each painting to be unique, different, and a complete exploration and a challenge.
I have never really painted like other people in a sense. I've studied Van Gogh's work, and I'm not comparing myself to Van Gogh, but and his level and his work, but I understand where he's coming from in the sense that he never drew quite like other people.
Also, I think it's the diversity. Each one of us has a different, completely unique style.
Yep.
And that's what we look for when we have members
that
coming
was
in.
the goal.
Yeah. Each one is completely different. We don't have two people painting exactly alike.
And we have a lot of diverse mediums.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I just think my work is just different. I think it's just different. And I don't know if it's, I don't think it's feminine. I just think it's different.
I think that I really developed this because I was always on the left foot when everyone was on the right foot. And I finally had a teacher who said, "Oh, you made a nice picture." It was 1947. I was 11. And it was, I think, the first time a teacher did anything different than yell at me about some stupid thing I did. So, you know, that's what happened. My first pat on the head.
Out of high school, I went to Dayton Art Institute on a scholarship, and I had a wonderful time for the first 2 years and lost my scholarship. And so I had to go to work.
But I was interested in it. I was creative, and I sent myself to art school when I was 33 years old.
He said, "Why don't you join my class? I'm over at the Y." So I did join his class, and fortunately, I think he was not the kind of teacher of primary students who looks at something and says, "Oh, that's interesting." No, he didn't. He'd say, "You didn't think about the reflected light, did you?" You know, and so I had very, very good training. I had lots of good luck those years.
I went back to school when, after I got married, went back to the Dayton Art Institute and finished up my degree. But after I graduated, I went back to painting and have done that ever since.
With a friend of mine, she and I had always wanted to try encaustic, so she came from Ohio, I came from here, and we met in Santa Fe and went north up to the Ghost Ranch, which was George O'Keeffe's place, which was fabulous. And they had set up these hot boxes. There were 13 of us, and it was open 24/7. And the teacher was incredible. Her name was Paula Rowland. And that's where I fell in love with this medium.
She opened me up to do more than just the still lifes, and finding out about the light, in finding out about all these things that I needed to know in order to make them live again.
I didn't paint for a while. I was in retail. I worked for the Disney stores. And then I married my husband, and he really pressured me to start painting again. And we kind of had an argument about it. It's probably one of the few arguments we've had. And I'm like, why? And he goes, just start painting. And I did. And then I didn't stop. I haven't stopped. It's been like 9 years. I haven't stopped. And I finally asked him, like, why did you do that? He goes, well, I just wanted to see what would happen. I said, oh, well, so far so good. So that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Painting will never be dead. And in fact, I think it's going to come back, because just like records are coming back, as opposed to CDs or digital music, because it's better, because it's tactile. You can touch it, you can feel it. It's made by hand. It's made by someone's imagination. It's real. So it can't be dead, because until human existence is gone, painting will still be here.
I think my mother always had a rather unique style and vision. It was very personal. People always featured highly in her work. There are figures that are repeating over the years. As with many artists, I think some of the figures, or at least one of the figures, is probably her, even though I think that would be a revelation to her. But artists do tend to put themselves in their own work, especially works that are fantasy-oriented.
I'm having a harder time with my painting than with my drawings, with the mark making.
How often do you paint?
Every day.
Every day? How many hours?
I take Sundays off. I always take Sundays off. Usually I get out to my studio around 12 and I'm done around 6 or 7.
Even when your husband's here?
Yeah. Even when he's here. Like the first 2 weeks, maybe not so much because I get to see him again. But then you're like, okay, I saw you, so I'm going to go paint again.
A colorist. I love color. To me, painting is a celebration. I don't really philosophize about my work. I just do. I just paint. I just pick up a brush.
The thing that I think about most when it comes to art is the fact that drawing is an ancient need for human beings. It is probably one of the earliest languages that we've spoken.
I can draw well, and I think that's so important. So many people they don't teach drawing a lot in schools anymore. And it's not about, it's like doing the scales for a musician. You're practicing, you're honing your craft. Whereas if I can't see, and drawing teaches me to see, how can I get the essence of something?
The landscape basically is what I'm involved in. I do abstractions of the landscape, and I'm really involved in mark making a lot, and I'm trying to develop that. I've been doing that with my drawings.
I'm aware of painting every day. It might be weeks before I actually pick up a brush, but I've been every day. It's like, why aren't you, first of all, why aren't you painting? And then it's ideas that it seems to, sometimes things just coalesce in your mind and you're ready for it. And if you aren't ready, you can't get very far.
I have painted in different ways. I started painting with oils. I started working in a more controlled way 30, 40, 50 years ago. And now I sort of work in a more, I would say, more fluid. I'm using a lot of collage. This is a piece I just finished. It's basically using papers to create the image, and then I paint into it and around it. So I'm not just using the paint by itself, I'm adding stuff to it all the time. So I think my work has changed to become more multimedia.
So when I first started painting seriously, I was painting in oil. I painted in oil for about 11 or 12 years and was invited on a painting trip, and I was told to bring my watercolors, and I said, watercolor? I paint in oil. And they said, well, bring your watercolors anyway. Never knew I could draw with my right hand. I'm left-handed, and I loved it. It was so much fun, and I've been doing it ever since, and if not for Judith, I probably wouldn't have some of the awards that I have now. I've been accepted in some national shows, so it's been a really fun and exciting and interesting phase of my life.
What influences me is a deep interest in psychology. I'm very interested in things that are conscious to the mind and unconscious. And what I like, the way I like to work sometimes, whereby I get very lost, is I like to start something in a very spontaneous way and build it and not know where I'm going. And then at some point, that work resonates and it tells me what I'm looking at. And I like discovering something like that.
What I'm trying to do in my paintings is have something, a feeling for something, whether it's a natural environment, rather than a specific tree, mountain, and house, for example. I want the atmosphere or the sensation of it. And I want every person that looks at it to have their own interpretation of it and to see different things depending on their mood or their response to it. Rather than taking things as they seem, as representational objects, an apple or a pear, I would rather have a sense of the form. And I like to have forms that penetrate and interpenetrate, that weave together, that go over each other and under each other, that could possibly be many things depending on how you view it.
I do digital collages, and again, using the same sort of thing. I started out with vintage photographs, and I started out just cleaning them up because it was something I wanted my students to know how to do, clean them up, hand color them. And then I thought, well, while they're doing that, I'll just start adding them up, adding things to them, other things. And I probably have 30 of them.
Sometimes I show this painting and people said, how many hours did you take to finish? So I said, 15 years plus 15 minutes.
Well, I'm not a very colorful painter, and I never was a very colorful printmaker either. And if you look at my wardrobe, this is pretty much what I wear. It's gray and white.
The color is luscious. It is, I think it is one of the, well, you can do a tonalist painting also, but you can also use some really bright color. I think I have some bright color behind me on the painting. And the color is, I think, fabulous.
I'm more Silk Road, exotic, India, China. That's why I love Santa Fe so much, because it was that exotic and exciting. And the thing that excites me here about color is the water, that beautiful turquoise water. And the sky in New Mexico is much bigger than it is here. And you're in it more because here we have all these trees. And I just love palm trees. I have done palm trees ad nauseum, and I love that. But the reason I think I like color so much is my dad was a salesman for Coats & Clark zippers and thread. And two of my toys were one of those trays with the colored thread. And I played with that. And I also played with a big jar of buttons. So I just developed this innate sense of color. And I was talking to a friend of mine last night who's an artist, and we were talking about synesthesia, which is sensing color. And I hear colors. And there's just one yellow that just speaks to me on a different level. So, and they speak to me. And so, and I had the experience in Santa Fe was if people see color, they go, oh, please. No, it has no value. It's decorative.
And so I spent a few years doing my homages to Mark Rothko and stopped because you can only do so much of that, and it really wasn't mine anymore. I mean, it became more mine than it started out, but it took its course. And most of my series of work take their course. I do a series for a few years and then move on to something else. The way I start a painting is usually an idea or a visual idea.
I didn't go into it thinking I was going to make something that might suggest parts of a body or acts. It happened as I did them that it came into my mind from what it told me, not from what I told it.
But there's only me that can do what I'm doing. So why stop and redo something else? I've invented this vocabulary along these years. No one else paints like I do. I'm not equating it with quality, but no one does it like I do. No one's going to do it for me.
I would come back at night, I'd say, dear God, please, no more ideas. I just can't keep up with all the ideas,
But you have to commit yourself to it. You just really, you have to want it.
Yes.
You have to want it.
I'm a reformed painter. I don't paint very much. I make three-dimensional collages from anything I can possibly think of.
Well, I don't think you ever stop evolving.
Now that I've achieved the goals that I set for myself in watercolor, I'm ready to start exploring other mediums and, going kind of wild with my experimental stuff. I like what I do, and I have to go with it. And that's it. I mean, if somebody discovers my work and after I'm gone, that's fine. And if they don't, that's fine too. I had the joy of doing it.
At one point, when I had lost several of these people, that I did sort of garish pastel things that were kind of scary looking, you know, or kind of a sad approach to family or something, you know. There was a period like that, and my husband said to me once, "You used to do such pretty things, you know. Why are you doing these?" And I didn't really think about it. I just went on and found out that I was not getting much from doing that type of thing.
Art Center Sarasota. We had a September 11 exhibit, and I had a little message to go with this painting, and I didn't get the award, but it was accepted. I had to do it, you know, as an artist.
A painting that I would make when I was so devastated about something that I would feel I couldn't paint. And this happened in one session when I came in to paint after having a very close friend losing their son to cancer. And this represents to me the ephemeral nature of life. And it's purposely trying to be a chalk that if you would just take an eraser, it could be erased. And that is how I had to express it. So when you say what happens if you don't paint, sometimes I have to paint in order to express something that I can't talk about.
When I was first diagnosed, when I was in treatment, I had a show. In spite of that, I had a show at the Selby Gallery. I had a one-woman show. And this is called She Kept On Running. It's showing a female, it's a woman, it's like she's going against the wind, you know. The force is just tearing into her clothes, going diagonally. She's got one foot forward because she's moving. She's still moving in spite of this force. Once again, it's done in a color palette that's restricted, which, as I mentioned, I like to do. And in spite of all of this, she's holding her hand here and here is holding a heart. It's like she's holding a heart in her hand because of love.
A series of abstracts that I have done. The series is titled Fault Lines, and it has to do with human frailties. This particular piece is titled Mixed Signals. I like to do a lot of layering. I like to have the viewer feel as if he's going into the painting and seeing things revealed underneath.
I'm interested in design when I paint, not just what I'm painting, but how I position it on the canvas and how it looks when I'm all, when I'm all ready to begin the, after the drawing on the canvas. I always take that into consideration, and I think it shows in my work.
I did some of wild things, like that. Later I show you, that one is a kind of collage and combination of my calligraphy to watercolor to everything. So it's really, a lot of Asian artists said East and West combined.
I like the ethnic art. Lots of things, inspire me. There's not one or two particular go-to. Looking back, as I've gotten older, looking back at some of the things in my life, I have felt a need to express some of that, which I've done in my artwork too.
I'm really, and always have been, interested in inside and outside light. Paintings are usually people that I know, family members, and then all the objects that are in the paintings, a lot of them have to do with family. called the sketchbook as an art form, and that's something that I learned about when I was in college. And my sketchbook has always been a source of experimentation and of actual on-location ideas, and often they've been the source of illustrations. And today when I go out plein air painting, or when I'm thinking of something I want to paint, I will go to my sketchbooks and work out ideas.
So, it's very difficult. But some of the technique, like for example, that painting, you have to wait until dry, one step, and then we do another technique and wait to dry, or wait a half dry, and then we added something, that kind of thing. Yeah.
But I always use females. I always use images of women. I've always had this very strong connection through my mother and my grandmother, very strong women in my family, and that has influenced me greatly.
And now I've gotten more into abstracts, but they all pertain to my landscapes. So this one right here, I had just gotten back from Hawaii, and I took a lot of pictures of the lava holes right by the water, where there's holes and the tide goes out and comes back in, and the holes are full of fish and shells and all kinds of little things in the water holes, and the lava is gray. So when I got back, I did gray and blue with fish and shells and all that in a deep hole, and then I was totally bored with it. And I said, okay, let's do the real thing. The real thing is the sky reflecting into the water hole. So I did the blue sky, and the lava got there by being very hot, and it's red and orange. So that's how this abstract came about. And it sent me off into a tailspin.
If I do not have an opportunity to come into the studio for a few days, I start to get a kind of agita. I mean, I'm in here every day. It could be how something's drying, or looking at something, is that finished, or, what does it need? But to use my hands in here is something makes me happy, keeps me centered.
I myself feel like I can't take the time sometimes just to go see a show. I am so egocentric, I have to admit, that all I want to do is my own work. It's a compulsion. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And as you say, what would I do if I had to stop? I'd have to find something.
When people look at my work, I think it's the color that speaks to them the most. When I first started painting with all this color, I would go in like a group show at the Sarasota Art Center or something like that, and you would walk into the gallery, and I looked at my hand like, oh my God, my paintings are screaming at me, because the color was so much stronger. And at the time, it was a little upsetting, because I thought, okay, that's not good and everything. But I couldn't, how hard I tried, I couldn't tone it down. But I also use a very limited palette. I only use 8 different colors, and a lot of times I use them right out of the tube. I'm not a big mixer. I focus a lot on the light and how the light can affect how people perceive their surroundings. So, like the one painting I sold to Leslie was of 2, I can't remember what type of tree it was, but it had all the shadows in there. And when you look at that painting, which I actually am proud of that painting, it was really quite large, and you felt like you're laying on the grass and you're looking up into the trees and the light. And from looking at that, you could feel the time of day it was.
These are our babies. Not everybody's going to love them. We love them, but they won't. And I think there's going to be creative people for the rest of time, always, and there's going to be painters.
When I'm speaking about art to people, their eyes are big.
Yeah.
Because nobody has the time usually to sit and talk to people and tell them about what art is, or what does it mean, or how does it affect people,
Right.
and how does it feel to make art. And why, they'll ask me, so what is this painting? What's it about? And it's very hard for artists often to tell people what it's about.
It reminds me of the time when I was painting and I asked my mother to come in and see a work that I had done, and there was a work, it was a painting of a lady. She was nude and her back was facing the viewer, and she was in the mirror and looking at herself, and she was just posing. And my mother looked at it and she said, you know, I really like that, but why is that woman strangling her husband? And I just thought, it's all what you bring to it.
And how do you critique yourself?
I set it up and I walk around a lot. And then, of course, I've got a big family at my house, and they have a lot to say.
You listen to them?
Yeah, some. My daughter's was an art major, and then she became a geologist instead. And she has a really good eye, and she will say, I don't know about that. And then I start looking at it, and I'm like, well, maybe she's right. But not always. Not always everybody's right. But, you know, if I don't think if I think you're wrong, you're just wrong. I just keep it the way I started in the first place. You know, I don't have that problem.
That's what speaks to me, is spirit and color.
The Circle series came one night when I was listening to some really high energy music, and I just started painting.
I just use the things that I like, and they end up looking, I don't know, surreal, symbolic, funky, whatever. I just put things in them that I like, images that appeal to me.
As the mix of painters change, the dynamics of the group changes. And the women that were part of it when I joined were terrific and wonderful painters. But it's interesting to see as new and younger people come in, it's like fresh blood. They're adding certain things, different ideas, a different take on things. And who knows where we'll go. And I hope I'm around a long time to see what happens.
It's a journey that's hard, and you have to be dedicated, you have to believe in what you do. And I think we all have gone on that road. And it goes beyond whether or not I'm going to sell a painting. Oh, that's nice, but you know, you just have to keep putting it out there. And sometimes you're successful at it, and then sometimes you're not. But you have to believe in what you're doing. And I think that's a strength that is exhibited by a lot of the work of the Petticoat Painters, who've been painting for a long time, and for the history of that organization, and the fact that they're still functioning. We're still here. We're still at it.
And thank everybody for coming.